Okay, thank you, Brad. We have one question from Amanda. She asks, how often do you have to replace the plastic on the hoop houses?
Okay, that's a great question, and I'm sorry I didn't go over that. It's a really important one. So just to talk about the plastic for a second, you want to be using a UV treated plastic and at least 6 mil thickness. So that plastic's going to be rated for a certain amount of years of durability. Most of them have 4 years stamped on them, and we're usually able to get 4 years easy. I've had some houses, if we're taking really good care of them, last for 5 years. So it's actually one of the least expensive parts to maintain on the hoop houses. It's amazingly cheap to replace that plastic. So on that small house, it's about $200 to replace that. And if you're only doing that every 4 or 5 years, really you're going to be recouping your money if you're doing a good job growing crops in there. I think you can pay off a hoop house. You should be able, if you're doing a good job, be able to pay that off within 3 years of starting that.
Great, thanks, Brad. Amanda has another question. She asks, do you have any predator problems with your chickens?
Yeah, we do have predator problems. We have hawks and owls, so that's just for starters. Our competing bird life will always take interest in these guys. So if the birds are healthy, though, if the chickens are healthy, I think they tend to really be able to sense when those predators are around, and they can get in that hoop house whenever they want. So I rarely see attacks from a healthy, mature chicken from those. We do see problems with immature birds, younger birds, and birds that aren't as healthy. So you can always add more protection. We've got some growers around our area that have such trouble with the hawks that they actually do bird netting over their outdoor setups like this. So that's one. And then you are going to have the potential for mammal predators. So skunks and raccoons, weasels, any of those guys are going to cause problems. The electric netting is only going to do so much. You can see it's not the most forbidding enclosures. So if a critter really wants to get through there, they can pile through that net and get in. So putting your birds away at night, closing them up into, if you have a hoop like that, that is the most important thing you got to do, because those mammals are going to come in at night.
Thank you, Brad. That was a great presentation, and we don't have any more questions at this time. So we'll go ahead and move on to our second speaker, which is Jen Elliott with Palouse Prairie Farms. So Jen, you have the floor.
Great, thanks, Colette. So I'm just going to start by giving you a little bit of an idea of our farm. We are in Troy, Idaho. We've been on our farm. This is our 8th year. We have 105 acres, about 80 of which is in pasture. And when we purchased our farm, you can kind of see from this picture on the first slide that it was all ground that was conventionally farmed with wheat and legumes rotated. And then when we took it over, it was planted in a legume that the owner harvested, and then that's what we were left with, was what remained after the harvest of some peas. So first I'm going to talk, if we can go to the next slide, please. First, I'm going to talk a little bit about pasture renovation and soil building and what equipment it takes to do those things. So when we started, we basically had, if you're not familiar with what you end up with after having just a field of winter peas and after they harvest it, it's pretty minimal amount of cover. It's very fine and small, the leaf that's left after that. And so the opportunity in the fall for high soil erosion is pretty big. Especially with the types of soils that we have here on the Palouse. They're highly erodible if there's not some root structure holding the soils in place. And so what we had to do immediately on our place was to figure out what we were going to plant and get it planted and have something that was going to address those concerns of soil erosion. So these things that I'm talking about now are going to be things we have progressed to over the years of being able to do. The first year that we were on there, that we moved there, we were not able to, we were just moving there and just taking over the land, so we had the help of someone that we hired to come and seed that for us. But I did all the research to figure out what type of planting mix to put in, which we tried to have it be instead of what had been on there before, a monoculture planting of just a grain crop. We tried to select grasses that would grow in the warm and the cool seasons, as well as adding legumes for the nitrogen building in the soil to help the grasses thrive more. And so that's what was in our initial planting, is that mix. And we did that over our entire property. And then in subsequent years, each year what we do to help build that soil, since the land uses prior to us owning it were fairly hard on the soils because it was constantly having chemical inputs and fertilizers and things without necessarily giving back things to build the soil. And so what we have done over the years, and what you're looking at here on the screen now, are pictures of what we're doing to try and build our soil. So we, and also maybe I should step back for one moment to give you an overview of what we raise on our farm. We raise livestock, mainly cattle, sheep, pigs, poultry, including chickens and turkeys. And so when we're establishing our pasture, it's mainly for the ruminants that we raise, which are cattle and sheep, that we do rotational grazing and mob grazing on our ground. And I know that you've had these types of discussions in previous webinars, so I'm not going to go into that, but that's what we're trying to establish a pasture for, is for doing the rotational grazing of our animals. So when in the winter time, when our animals are in a spot where we can collect their manure, in the springtime we pile that up and we mix that in. We do a deep bedding in their winter pens, so there's a lot of straw and a lot of whatever hay that doesn't get consumed goes into with their manure. And then several times throughout the season we turn the compost piles, and you can see that we end up with very large piles of compost. And then we have a manure spreader that is driven with our tractor with the PTO, and it basically just has a belt that runs underneath the tractor, or sorry, underneath the bucket of the spreader there, that constantly pulls it back towards that metal part that's flinging on the back, and that's how the manure the compost gets spread out into the field. Next slide, please. And so here I'm going to talk just a little bit about the actual seeding and in what is now what we're doing to do these soil enhancements. Because the soil was so depleted, we've had to do a lot of the grazing helps, where the animals are grazing off the crop that's on there and depositing their manure directly into the field. But like I said, we also add manure, but we usually try and intensify that onto a particular area each season. So we'll just select maybe a 4 or 5 acre pasture that we're going to hit hard. We found that if we can give it a whole lot, we're trying to hit the worst areas first. And so if we have an area that is particularly depleted, we'll put all of our manure that we've composted into that area to try and get it to be the best. And this is the equipment that we use to do it. Let me also back up just to kind of a big overview picture. When we purchased our place, we had, it was only acreage. There were no outbuildings, there were no roads, no ponds. And like I said, we planted it all, transitioned it into a perennial pasture. The first thing that we did when we moved there. And so there wasn't any established long-term vegetation there. And so in doing that the very first season, and doing that into ground that was heavily depleted, we did see that it was pretty quick to grow a crop, but we also saw that the development of it was very slow, and it wasn't, definitely in comparison to other people's pastures where they're haying, was not growing as tall and lush and green because we weren't adding chemical additives like chemical fertilizers or anything to it. And then the soils didn't have the nutrients within them to be making them grow these really lush green thick crops of hay or grass for our animals to graze. And so what we've been doing, our rotational and mob grazing has helped over the last 8 years increase that steadily, and we're seeing drastic changes in what is happening to the pasture we've planted. But to try and get those pastures to grow even better over the last handful of years, when we can, what we do is we take like I said, a small acreage where we'll do light tillage, replant it, and add some additional things that I'll address with these slides here to help make that better and build our soils more. So the first thing I'll talk about in that top right picture there is showing our tractor with our seed drill on it. I'll briefly address that there's a lot of discussion about no-till drilling. This is what would probably be considered an old-fashioned no-till drill. This is a low-dollar, low-equip way of doing no tilling. So it's kind of hard to see, but at the back of that drill there's just 2 metal discs, and what they do when you pull it is it opens the soil up, and the metal bin at the top is where the seeds are, and they fall down. There's an adjustment so that you can make it for the size of seeds that you're putting in there. The seeds drop down a little chute into between those metal discs where it's opening up the soil, drops it in there, and then there's a set of harrows that would be pulled behind that to help cover it up and smooth it over. In the bottom right picture there, you'll see behind, there's that same seed drill, and there's a roller behind it that's a solid roller. One of the important things when doing a pasture seeding is to make sure that the seed bed is firm. And so the layers of loosening the soil up enough that you're going to be able to get good new seed crop establishment is important, but then making sure that it's firm so that you get good soil contact. One of the biggest things with the seeds of doing pasture management, do I need to be, okay, sorry. So one of the biggest things is that the seeds for grass and things, legumes, like for instance, like a clover seed, if you're not familiar with them, they're very tiny, the end of a pin drop. And so they're very small, and so trying to get those into the soil and not too deep so that they're still going to germinate well, but deep enough so that they get connection with enough soil and moisture and nutrients that they need is very critical. And when you're doing it small scale, a lot of people, just because of the equipment it takes to do it, do broadcast seeding, which does work, except you have to put twice as much seed to get less germination just because of the conditions. A lot of it's getting lost to just exposure and not getting contact with the soil.